Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. And joining me is original World Hockey Association Houston Aero, Jack Stanfield. The Aeros celebrating their 50th anniversary. Actually, the 72-73 season was the inaugural season. And it's so great to catch up with you, Jack. Thanks so much for doing this.
Wow, my pleasure. And the celebration was unbelievable, really, way beyond what all of us thought. And I think it brought back some memories for us that, when you get into the conversation with the other players, you remember things you forgot about. Some maybe it was good that you forgot about them, but, but we had a good time.
You come into Houston. You had a lot of the original guys there. How many were you able to get for the whole deal? For the whole
we got about 12, and then from those days, there's a lot of guys that are not alive. Think about that. The season we won, the first season, was 50 years ago. So if you were a 20-year-old 50 years ago, you're 70. If you were a 30-year-old, you're 80. And Gordie was 43, I think, or 44. So, so it's a while.
Does this look like you? Is that you?
That is me. Yeah. Babe in arms, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you, the Aeros, they brought hockey to Houston. What was it like to play hockey in Houston? How were the fans back then?
It was unbelievable. It's hard to put your mind around. But the years that team was here in 72 through 78, we outdrew the Rockets every year, believe it or not.
The Rockets had just gotten here, right? They just arrived.
Yeah. But still, that's the NBA, right?
Right.
And this is a big basketball town. But we were unique in the storyline of the new league and also the storyline of the house. I mean, if you take the greatest hockey player at that point, the greatest hockey player of all time, he played 25 years in the National Hockey League and then comes out of retirement to play with his kids. For the media, it was a great story. And for the players that were involved in it, it was a great story.
Speaking of the House, Marty Howe said that nickel beer nights, there were more fights in the stands than on the ice. Is that right?
Yeah. The old Colesium was a great place. And we were there the first 3 years. The fact that the Rockets came to town and the success we had with the Aeros was the catalyst that helped build the Summit. And it was a great building when we opened it. It was fun to be there, and it was a good place to showcase both basketball and hockey.
I want to ask you some Aeros questions, but just your history. Before you got here, you had bounced around hockey for, I guess, 12 years around professional hockey, and you had even played in one NHL game. Is that right?
I'll tell you, this is a great story. I mean, in those days, when I turned pro, there were only 6 NHL teams. And you would grow up inside, even from when you were 12 years old, inside the Chicago Blackhawks or the Montreal Canadiens or the Rangers or the Boston Bruins. You were in their farm system, just like in baseball where you got AAA, AA, all that. In those days, there was a Central Hockey League, there was the American Hockey League, there was the Western Hockey League, there was the Eastern Hockey League. These were all minor leagues, AAA, AA, that type of thing. With only 6 teams, like your left winger, there were only 4 jobs. I had one of 4 jobs. So, you had to work your way up. And I went to Blackhawks training camp in 61. And Tommy Ivan was the GM, and he says, Jack, we want you to be a Blackhawk, and we're going to give you $500 to sign, $500 signing bonus, and we'll give you $3,500 for the season. I said, Tommy, I can make more money in the Eastern Hockey League. Well, think about it, he said. Think about it. And then he calls me in a couple of days. He make you sit in his office a little bit, and then he call in a couple of days later and sit in the office, and they say, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to go to the Eastern Hockey." He said, "Okay." So I go to Philly. I'm 20 years old. I go to Philadelphia. It was Eastern Hockey League. It was the Philadelphia Ramblers. I got 33 goals. I got 34 assists in my first year. Great season, rookie season. Come back to the Blackhawks because you're still in the Blackhawks organization. Next season, Tommy Evans says, "Jack, we want you to be a Blackhawk. We'll give you $1,000 to sign." And $4,000. I said, "Okay, I'll take it." Then they sent me to St. Louis. My centerman in St. Louis was Phil Esposito. He was just coming into his second year pro. Halfway through the year, he went up to the big club and never came back. But yeah, American League. I was in the American League 5 years. I was in the Western League 2 years. I played in San Diego and LA. I played in the Central League in St. Louis and Dallas. And but you learned a lot. And then I got called up in the playoffs and be a standby in the playoffs for the Blackhawks, and did get into, as you said, one game, and that was qualified me. So at least I'm an NHLer in that, in the sense that I got a game in.
How long were you in the game?
I was in the game 14 years.
I mean, how long were you in that specific game? Did you get
a lot
of minutes, or?
Yeah, I played on Stan Mikita's line. Yeah, I played the whole game. It was a regular spot. Dennis Hull was the left winger, had an injury, and they had me take his place then. So that was exciting.
Are we looking at you right here?
You are. I don't know where you got it, but good picture. Yeah. And I played with some great players. Willie O'Ree played in San Diego. Was the first Black hockey player that played in the National Hockey League. I played with my brother Fred, who played 16 years in the NHL. And I'm the oldest of 7 brothers. 5 of us played pro hockey. My brother Jim won the American Hockey League Championship and the Central Hockey League Championship. My brother Vic was at BU with Eruzione and won NCAA. And my brother Fred won 2 Stanley Cups in Boston. The family did well. My brother Vic, that won the NCAA, went to Germany and won the German national championship over in Europe. It was a good learning curve, and it was enjoyable for me. And then I would always go back to Toronto and work in the golf business in the off season, because you could work 2 jobs. You could work summertime in Canada in the golf industry, hockey in the winter in the U.S.
Before I ask you about Gordie and we start getting into the Aeros, you mentioned you played with Willie and helped integrate hockey. Was that a lot different of an experience than we heard about with Jackie Robinson and what was going on in baseball? What was that experience like to be around that on a regular basis?
I don't know why it wasn't there. There wasn't the controversy around. I mean, in Canada, the Black population is less in numbers, but we didn't run into issues around that.
I'm thinking maybe it's just because it was so much about Canada, and race seems to be so much of a subject here in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Well, how did you find out that Gordie Howe was coming to the Houston Aeros?
It was a big deal because signing Mark and Marty at age of 18 and 19 was against the NHL rules. So the WHA made a rule that they could sign an 18-year-old, and that allowed them to sign the 2 kids early enough. What made that happen, Bill Dineen, the coach and general manager here, he played with Gordie in Detroit. He's a Detroit guy. He knew Colleen. He knew the Howes. Another guy behind the scenes that people do not know or don't remember is Bill had Doug Harvey, the Montreal Canadian Hall of Fame hockey player, who was a background scout for him. And Barry Fraser, this is another tidbit around the Aeros. Barry Fraser out of Hamilton, Ontario, was our head scout. When the Aeros folded, Bill sent Barry to Edmonton. If you look at the Edmonton Oilers, you look at their history, Barry Fraser is the guy that built that franchise. That guy came from our organization to help build the Edmonton and win, 5 Stanley Cups or whatever they won. So the legacy of what Dineen did in hockey is pretty lengthy and pretty important. And it started here. Well, he was a player, obviously got a lot of friends and cohorts and players that he played with that helped us with the franchise here. But there was another guy. This is a part of the story too. Jim Smith was the GM that hired Dineen. He was a young attorney out of Dayton, Ohio. The team was first owned by Paul Deneau out of Dayton. They were going to keep the team in Dayton, but they couldn't build it. They couldn't find the effort to build a building. So they had no place to play. So he started looking around, and that's when they found Houston as an option.
From what I understand, the Aeros nickname was based on the Wright brothers, and it just worked out perfectly that they were coming to Houston and the aerospace industry and that sort of thing. It worked out to where the Aeros nickname was perfect for Houston too.
It was great. It was great. But the story about Jim Smith, who was a young attorney and a bright young man, and I consider him to be my mentor for all the things that happened to me in sports. Jim, when he left after the 3rd season, he went to California and he went into the racing industry. He ran Los Alamitos racetrack in Southern California. He's the guy that got off-track wagering approved by the California government or by the state legislature. He's the guy that pushed that through. So his legacy is beyond the WHA. It's in the horse racing industry as well.
Mark and Marty said that Gordie would not respond to them when they were all teammates if he called him Dad. Is that right? They called him Gordie? They called him Gordie?
Yeah, well, not all the time, because I sat between Mark and Marty in the corner of the dressing room, and Gordie was across from us. I heard "Hey, Dad" a few times. Yeah, maybe not on the ice or anything. He wouldn't say it, but in the dressing room, you heard it.
Gordie said in his autobiography that his years in Houston were some of the most fun he had playing hockey. Let me ask you, what was it like for you to play with Gordie Howe?
Dineen had the ability to pull together quality veterans. So there were a lot of veterans here. Larry Lund, Teddy Taylor. I mean, a whole list goes on and on. So that environment had been around Gordie. He had played against Gordie, grew up with Gordie. So it was family oriented, and that made it good for the kids too. Gordie wasn't treated like in awe in some ways. I mean, he was treated just the same. Like I'll give you an example. We trained in Minnesota. So, Gordie hadn't played for a couple of years. And the ice up there, I don't know whether you've ever been to Minnesota, but the ice up there the air is clear. The ice is like sheen of ice. It was easy to skate on. So the first 2 weeks of training camp was not too hard. Not too hard on Gordie, not too hard on the rest of us. We thought we were in good shape. When we came in September down to Houston and stepped on the ice in the Colesium, it was like stepping into a sauna. I mean, it was steamy. The ice was hard to skate on. And I thought, honestly, Gordie was going to die. I mean, I thought we were going to die. The players, all of the players, it was a tough transition. And one of the first practices and I reminded Mark of this when we got together. Gordie had this little trick where he'd leave the end of his stick sticking out, and he'd catch you and pull you around and throw you off balance. Well, he did that to me in a scrimmage practice one day. I turned around and cross-checked him, and he went into the boards and was out cold. He was totally out. They had to take him to the hospital. I mean, he was out. I said to myself, I'm gone. I'm not going to be here. But anyway, he laughed about it, and we laughed about it for the rest of that year. But, it was a little scary. He did have a bit of a concussion. So
yeah, you got to remind people, he's in his mid 40s. Like, what? It had to be amazing to see this guy who was so great at that time. In his mid 40s.
It wasn't. You know what? He played 6 years in the WHA. Then he came back and played 2 more years in the NHL. 8 years he played from the age of 43, I guess, to 51 or 2. I think the first NHL All-Star game, he was voted the most valuable player. He had an unusual body. His body was built for the game. His arms, he's Al Kaline, as a baseball player. Just had that, arms just hung down, and he was so strong. He and Bobby Hull were 2 real specimens, physical specimens, and amazing hockey players. Because he had not just physical skill, but he had a sense of the game too. He was good. He had good hands. He could shoot. He could pass. There wasn't any skill that he didn't have, and he was mean. There was a game in Minnesota where John Shella got kicked out of the game. This is later when I was doing the broadcasting with Trupiano. We're watching the game, and Shella gets, one of our players, a defenseman, gets kicked out of the game for cutting Shaky Walton across the head. And Shella's going to the ref. I didn't even touch him. We went back on the replay. When Shaky Walton was going by Shella, Gordie reached over with one hand with a stick and slashed, just whacked the top of Shaky Walton and cut him. He cut him for, maybe 25 stitches in the forehead, and never said a word. Just kind of, that was Gordie. He was mean, sneaky, but he loved to play. He's kind of like, George Foreman, like he wanted to be on the ice, like Foreman. He didn't want to sit down, right? In between rounds.
Right.
Gordie was kind of like that. He wanted to be on the ice. So even Bill wouldn't sit him. He couldn't sit him. Gordie wouldn't have it. Yeah.
You mentioned the voice of the Aeros at that time, Jerry Trupiano. We had him on the show when Gordie passed away, talking a little bit about Gordie with the Aeros. And he said some great stories about Gordie interacting with the fans. What do you remember about Gordie and the way he interacted with his fans, and especially here in Houston?
Gordie had a little bit of a mean streak in him, and he would go up to little kids, little small kids, and he'd lock his hands on either side of their head like this, and just pick them up. And he'd be talking to them, and the kids tears would be coming down their eyes, and he thought that was as funny as you could get. But poor kids, and so we were talking to Mark and Marty, and they had, at the party, and Marty says, yeah, he says he did that with all kinds of kids. He says he loved to do that, but he says it would scare the heck out of the kids. But Gordie had that little kid's grin, where you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, but you're having fun doing it.
Yeah, Trupiano was telling me that people would be lined up and he would sign autographs until the last person.
Yeah. I think all of us in that era respected the game. I mean, we loved the game. It is a great game. It's a shame we just were, Kenneth Snitzer, who owned the team, was anxious to get Houston into the National Hockey League. And we made some moves to try to bring the Colorado team down here. Last minute, it broke down, and we didn't get it. Or if we had stayed in the WHA, we probably would have a franchise right now if we had stayed one more year, because they all merged.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that a little bit later. Hold on to some of the thoughts on that, because before I get there, Mark Howe, we always talk about Gordie, but Mark, he goes 16 years in the NHL after all of this, goes into the Hall of Fame. What do you remember about playing with the kid, the 18 and 19-year-old?
He had as good passing skills as anybody I've ever played with or seen in the game. He had that ability. He would look, and it didn't matter where the guy was. He could put the puck nicely, good pace, right on the guy's stick. Across the ice, short pass, little flip, didn't matter. He had the hand skills. And that's part of the reason why Dineen moved him back on defense. He knew he could move the puck anywhere and start plays or set somebody up with a play. If somebody passes to you in the right position, in other words, okay, not a little behind you, not a little too far in front of you, on stride, right on your stick. Wow, what a difference. Mark had that. The irony is he talked about his years in the NHL and the fact he got in the Hall of Fame, but he's on the Stanley Cup 4 times, but not as a player. He's on there because he now works for the Red Wings, and they won the Stanley Cups when he was in scouting with them.
Yeah, so just the legacy is unbelievable. Another name, John Tonelli, who goes to 4 Stanley Cups with the Islanders. What do you remember about him and how good he was?
He was Tono at 18 was as intense a player. In fact, Tono was so intense, he would get migraines. But coming here, he learned how to work in a team environment. Again, an 18-year-old, learning from Gordie Howe and the environment of Teddy Taylor and the guys that were in this organization. And then he went to the Islanders, and they won 4 Stanley Cups. To this day, he's in their Hall of Fame with the Islanders. And when they talk about the Stanley Cups, he's one of the players that they credit for that. I think he was and is, and he wanted to be here. The day before he was flying down to join us, his son got sick, and they had to put him in the hospital. So he couldn't make it. So too bad. But I think he's okay now.
What was Houston like back in that time? Because it's changed drastically, of course, over the years.
Downtown was pretty active. There was a lot going on downtown. It was a good spot. And that arena downtown was great. You put 7,000-8,000 in that building, and the fans were right on top of you. And so it was an engaging environment for playing. And we started drawing, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 on a regular basis. I mean, if you look at the pictures of when we won, I mean, it was sold out the last in the playoffs. It was crazy. And they had wrestling down there, and they had the Rockets down there, and they had, so it was a fun building to play in. It wasn't fancy, but it was a good hockey building.
Well, here is a Houston Aeros puck that was from a game. I do not remember if I was at this game or my dad brought it back or something like that, but there you go. That's a Aeros game puck from back in that era.
Right.
And I believe, and you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, the Aeros practice facility was the old Sharpstown ice rink. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. It was. Just finding ice then was a bit of a challenge. Over the years, we had one out, I think, sort of out on Highway 10. There was a place out there near the shopping area, and then Sugarland later on, and so there was some nice. We even Galleria, when they put the ice in there, we'd go over there every once in a while to do some showcase and marketing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I bring up the Sharpstown rink because that's where I learned how to skate myself. I grew up just a few minutes away from the Sharpstown rink. So
it was a fun recreational place, you know. I mean, just to go out and skate for fun. I mean, we would do that sometimes, just go out there and skate just recreationally. So that was good.
Now, Gordie once said the Aeros would have been in the top 6 to 8 teams in the NHL at that time. How good was the hockey in the WHA and the Aeros?
I'd say the team we had in Houston, when you take a look, Ruskowski was captain of 3 NHL teams.
Yeah.
You know, pretty good leader. Teddy Taylor, Murray Hall, all those guys played in the NHL. You know, look at the Astros now. You got to have the right chemistry, the right mix of players, the right temperament, the right ability to lean on somebody or somebody to show up when you need it. You know, and that's what Deneen knew how to do. Now,
you guys at one point, did you play against Bobby Hull in the playoffs?
Yeah, we did the first year, I think, and they beat us. And I think we did one other season. Can you excuse me just for a minute? I'll be right back.
Okay.
I'm gonna bring something. This is the little cup every player gets. The Avco. It was neat. My dad, because my brother had the two Stanley Cups, and I had the 2 Avcos. So my dad got one of each. So back in Toronto, he had the NCAA trophy, a Stanley Cup, and an Avco trophy. And so that was pretty good for the mantle.
Yeah, really unbelievable. Some just an amazing story the Aeros were, and just to kind of put a wrapper on what happened for those who know the story, they were desperately trying to get into the NHL in the 70s and the late 70s. And tell me if I'm getting the story wrong here, Jack, but I understand the NHL decided they only wanted to take 4 of the WHA teams. They took in all 3 Canadian teams. So it came down to the Hartford Whalers or the Aeros. The Whalers were going to win out. So the Aeros owner, at that time, it was Kenneth Schnitzer, tries to buy the Cleveland Barons so he could move them to Houston, because the Barons, it looked like, were up for sale, but the NHL didn't like that idea. So the Barons ended up merging with the Minnesota North Stars, and the Aeros were left on the outside looking in. Is that right?
Not quite.
Okay.
In 1978, Kenneth, and I was the vice president of the club by this time. I was assistant general manager helping, but I was also doing the management side of things. And Kenneth said to me, if you can raise 5,000 season tickets, I think I can make a deal with Jack Vickers in Denver to move the Denver NHL franchise here. He said to us, he had that understanding. That was 1978. So that wasn't, the WHA ran through 1979, the following year.
Yeah.
So in 78, we were taking the position that we were going to move an NHL franchise here. I did a sales campaign. We did marketing and sales, and we sold 5,000 season tickets. We had it done. Harrison Vickers, who was the president, and myself were on a long distance call that evening before a potential press conference to announce we were bringing the Colorado team here. And we were talking, saying we were going to leave the WHA and bring an NHL team here. And we were hanging up, and somebody said, hold on. They thought we'd gone, and I stayed on the line. And they said they think they got a deal with Vickers. Vickers is not going to do the deal. So we tracked Kenneth down in the middle of the night. He got a hold of Vickers, and Vickers said, yeah, I changed my mind. So we had to back out of the press conference that we were going to announce we were bringing a team here. And then that's what closed the Aeros down. We already made the decision to leave the league. We already thought we were going to get in the NHL. You know, and Kenneth wasn't going to go back on his thoughts. That is the team. This is the irony of the whole thing. That's a team that John McMullen got to move to New Jersey. The team that was coming here is a team that went to New Jersey. So McMullen got the Devils, is the Colorado team that we were going to get here in Houston. Ironically, later on, after I started Home Sports Entertainment, McMullen became my owner for the regional sports channel. That was it's a crazy world, this world of sports. That's for sure.
Yeah, McMullen left sort of a sour taste in my mouth and many, because I was a little kid just loved Nolan Ryan, a huge Nolan Ryan fan. Of course,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He wouldn't bring Nolan back, and that kind of made him enemy number one in Houston when that was going on. But the Aeros, they were the only WHA team who won a title, but wasn't absorbed by the NHL.
But we were out of the league by then.
Yeah. You were out of the league.
Yeah.
But of the WHA teams that won a title, they were the only ones that the NHL didn't pick up.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing was that our players, a good body of our players went to Winnipeg and they won the final. It was Aero players that helped make the Winnipeg Jets the winning final year champion of the WHA. A whole body of them, Lukowicz and Preston and Ruskowski, they all went to Winnipeg and won another. So those guys, some of them have a couple an Avco Cup here and an Avco Cup in Winnipeg. Some of the guys that were here last weekend.
Yeah, just an amazing legacy for the Aeros. And I guess I want you to kind of conclude it all by just telling people like why this team was so special. I mean, what makes it so special to you, and what made it so special to be there at that time?
Houston is a hockey town for me. I mean, and remember, as we talked earlier, think about it. I've lived everywhere. Let me tell you, Seattle's a hockey town. I knew that when I was playing in the Western Hockey League. Now, Dineen knew how to he did all the way through his career. He knew how to put the right combination of players and build a team with character and chemistry. He knew that. He knew how to put that mix together. Even when the Howes left, we were still competitive. The team was still competitive. We still ended up in first place. I mean, it just, we were in first place pretty much every year we were here. It just, he knew how to build. If he lost somebody, player went somewhere else, he had people inside hockey that knew, okay, I'm looking for this kind of player, and he would find them. And that would fit in. That player would be a goalie, would it be a defenseman? Would it be a offensive guy that's going to score goals like Lacroix? Or it didn't matter. He knew how to find and put the right combination of players together. But at the root of it, to me, this city, still in my mind, of cities I've played in and lived in and everything else, is, look, I played in Dallas with the Blackhawks, so I know Dallas, I know that market. I played in St. Louis. Houston's a better hockey town than those towns. It is. I don't know why. It's just, I'm just saying, that's my judgment. I think this is a great hockey town. If we ever get an NHL franchise, I'm telling you, it'll sell out. It'll be very, very successful. I mean, sure, there are challenges. In today's market, you have to have a building. Franchises almost have to have a building, or ownership has to own all the teams or something. There's got to be something there. But I think if we ever get a hockey team, an NHL team back here in Houston, you'll see sellouts and lots of enthusiasm, and it'll be very, very successful.
Well, it's an incredible story. I feel like if this happened in New York or Boston or some city that was on the radar of the national people, that the Houston Aeros would be one of those 30 for 30s, and they would be doing documentaries about it, because this is an incredible story. And it really captured the city at a time when the Rockets were just moving here. They weren't playing all of their games in Houston. They played some of their games in San Antonio back then. People were just, getting used to NBA basketball. The Oilers were awful at that time. This was pre-Love Ya Blues, several years before that would happen. So, I just feel like it's an incredible story that I wish more people knew about. And I just really want to thank you for bringing this story to us.
Well, and I think the Aeros, not just our team, the WHA team, which was magical and special in its own way, but the teams in the 90s, the American International Hockey League Championship that was won by a hockey team here. There's 4 major championships that hockey has brought to this city. So hopefully we just need a Stanley Cup. That's all.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It'd be fun. It'd be fun.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for doing this.
Well,
Jack.
and thank you. Thank you for giving us the spotlight and being able to brag a little bit about the success of hockey.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.